Well, when we first started talking about making the film, the topic that we were really thinking about a lot was the contemporary relevance of videotapes. We knew a lot of people, and we ourselves were still kind of acquiring these videotapes even though they weren't being made anymore, because that was the only way to see certain films. And there were a lot of movies that were at risk of being lost. You know, video was the last stop for them. So that was something that we wanted to focus on, because it seemed like something that wasn't really publicized, that people weren't aware of, that we were losing this chapter of film history. And then also there was a discussion, you know, the three of us that worked on the film, we were children of the home video revolution, and it gave us access to movies that allowed us to start shooting our own films. And that story of the home video revolution and the impact that it had never really been told on camera. So we wanted to kind of merge those two things and, you know, tell a kind of comprehensive account of video and what it meant to everybody. Yeah, I mean, the videotape that I watched more than anything else was a bootleg of Gremlins 2. I went to see Gremlins 2 in the theater, and I was completely obsessed with it, and I wanted to see it again and again and again. And my parents weren't able to take me to the theater all the time, and they really couldn't afford to, you know, even if they had the time. But my mom's coworker heard from her that I loved this film, so she took her camcorder to the movie theater and recorded it off the screen. And I don't think my mom knew that she was breaking the law by doing this. She just, you know, was happy that she had this movie that I loved. And so she brought it home, and I had it for 6 or 7 months before it was actually released on video. So that VHS tape got watched over and over again. I probably watched it 80 or 90 times just because I loved Gremlins 2, and I had access to it even though it hadn't been released. So it was exciting to be able to watch it over and over and over again. So I'm sure there will never be a movie I watch as many times as I watched Gremlins 2. Yeah, it's something that we did talk to people about, but we weren't able to include it in the film just for time. But I think that is hugely important. You know, when you have a recording off of television, it doesn't just record whatever that program was, it records the commercials, it records any edits that were made to that program so that it would be able to air on television. If it was, you know, watching stuff on MTV, you would see the sequence that the music videos are in. So when you watch those, it instantly places you in a particular time and place. And that's something that is really unique to what videotape changed in our ability to kind of document our own culture as it was happening around us. So I think there's a need to sort of preserve and document a lot of that, but because it's so random, you know, it's based on what people happen to be recording at that time. I don't know how you could even organize something to try to preserve a lot of that material, but most people still have those videotapes that they recorded off of television. And it's interesting to think that, you know, if we find a way of digitizing all of this and put together some sort of archival effort, that will have this, you know, incredible document of our cultural history just because of what was happening on television at any particular given time, anywhere in the world. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that everything that's been placed on film probably has a reason to be preserved. You know, we look back now at films that were made 100 years ago, and they have a different significance than they did then. And I don't think there's any reason we should feel that that's not going to happen with the things that were shot in this period of time. So things like exercise tapes or TV spots or, you know, bumpers, things that aired on television, those tell a story of who we were at a particular time. And just because it doesn't seem significant or it doesn't seem to have artistic merit doesn't mean that we should throw it away. So I think there's a huge archival value to all of that material. Yeah, I really love the Vestron video logo. And it's not just the logo itself, it's the music that plays over it. You know, if I'm in a room or, you know, at somebody's house and I go to use the bathroom and they put on a tape and that sound comes on and I can hear it from across the house, and it's just like the faint little bit of that music, the moment I hear it, that activates a feeling inside of my, you know, body and my brain, and it just kind of explodes. There's something about that, and I can't trace it to a particular movie. I don't know why that is, but when I hear that jingle that accompanies the Vestron logo at the beginning of a videotape, it just makes me smile instantly every time. I mean, I think it's really important to educate people about the fact that there is a huge amount of film that is only available on videotape. There's no 35mm print that you can book to screen at a theater, and there's no other way to access this material. And I think a great way to do that is through public exhibition. If people happen to stumble into a screening at a bar or at a local theater and they're watching something on a videotape that they really really enjoy, and there's somebody there to kind of explain that this was the only way to access that, that immediately, you know, awakens something inside of people where they realize maybe I've been neglecting something that I could really be enjoying. And I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about. You know, this was all entertainment. These are things that we enjoyed, and there's no reason we shouldn't continue to enjoy it just because technology has moved beyond the format that it's trapped on. Yeah, I do understand. That happens in the English-speaking world too. There's a real value sometimes to videotapes for the reason that you're talking about. You know, if something hasn't been remastered and re-released in the language that you need to be able to understand or appreciate the film, you can kind of make a fan edit, is, you know, what they're usually called, where you can take the audio from the videotape and, you know, transport that to the new transfers, so you have a better looking version of the film but in the language that you remember or the language that you want. And that's a perfect example of how, you know, saving this material is enabling us to continue experiencing these films in a new way. Yeah, I really am interested in that because it happens all over the world. And, you know, if you really start getting into these dubbed versions of films, you actually hear the same voices, and you actually start to recognize some of the voice actors that will do the dubbing. And you start to see what a small world it is, because a lot of times it would be a very small pool of actors that would be doing these dubbing jobs. So you'll watch you know, a kung fu film, and then you'll see another kung fu film, you know, 2 or 3 weeks later, and you're hearing a lot of the same voices just playing different characters. So it has this kind of surreal quality where it's almost like an alternate reality version of that film, like you've stepped into another dimension and you're watching that same film in a new way. There's a lot of Shaw Brothers kung fu movies that were released in the States, in the US, dubbed into English, and it sometimes creates a totally different film because things that aren't supposed to be funny or campy get a laugh. You know, there's a movie called Crippled Avengers, and there's a scene in it where a guy says, and, you know, I don't think this would be funny subtitled, but it is funny, you know, when it's dubbed into English, where he says, "We'll meet here in 3 years and we'll take care of this problem." And then the camera pans up and then pans back down, and he says, "Well, it's been 3 years." And, you know, that's the sort of thing where it's like, it's the quality of the voice and, like, the deadpan delivery makes that humorous, whereas I don't think in the Chinese version anybody would laugh when they watch that. So it really is like a completely different experience of the film. And, I mean, that was happening in theaters, you know, with the dubbing, but video was a whole new level because films then were being released everywhere in places they weren't before. So you have, you know, them being dubbed into languages where they never were in the past. So there's a whole world of dubbed video cassettes that, you know, you can never sort through. There's endless numbers of them. Yeah, there's something about watching videotapes, I think because, you know, at the same time that I was growing up with VHS tapes, watching movies that way, camcorders were becoming cheaper and more popular, so you're watching a lot of home movies, things that were shot on videotape. So putting a videotape in and watching something felt very intimate. It felt like, you know, you were watching something personal. And so anytime, you know, you would fall asleep and wake up and the tape would be ending, or maybe sometimes it would be a tape that would segue into something else, something different than what you were watching when you fell asleep, there was something deeply creepy about that because it was happening in your house and it was like the same material that you knew, you know, you had a personal relationship with, that you could make things on. And so it sort of felt like anything could be contained on there. Like, you know, it was possible for anything to get put on one of those little black rectangles. So there was something, I think, a lot more personal and sometimes creepier about videotape. Yeah, you know, that's the thing. People talk about, you know, digital technology and how you can skip chapters and you can zoom through things. But with videotapes, you could fast forward and rewind through whatever you wanted, although maybe not at the same speed. But now with DVDs and Blu-rays, there are all of these locked things where you're forced to sit through things. So you can't skip the trailers, you can't skip that FBI warning. So you might have more control over the feature, but I actually find that more frustrating than anything that ever happened to me with a videotape, is being stuck watching something and not having the control to skip past it. I always prefer to get as close as possible to the original intentions of the filmmaker. So for the most part, I'm always going to choose, you know, a widescreen Blu-ray that's been properly preserved, or even, I mean, if possible, I always like to see things in a theater and see things, you know, on 35mm, or, you know, if it's a recent film, you know, maybe in its native digital format. But, I mean, when I'm watching VHS, as much nostalgia as I have for it, for me it's usually because that's the only way I can see something. You know, I'm looking for films that are only available there. And if they were to get reissued in a new way or have a new theatrical release, I would be really excited about that. So as much as I have a lot of emotional attachment to watching things on videotape, I would still prefer to see the movies look as good as they can. I love Montreal. I think it's a really beautiful city. There's a lot of history here. One of my least favorite things when I'm visiting places is when you go there and they don't seem to have any concept of their past. You know, they seem to erase their past every few years. Everything is new. You know, they're always rebuilding everything. There's a lot of old Montreal here. There's a lot of its history, and I like that. You know, it makes me feel comfortable when I'm walking around. And the other thing that I really like about it is that there's obviously a really wonderful creative community here. I've met, since I've been here, about 3 different organizations that are doing VHS archiving, and I've met so many people that are doing interesting street art. Everybody seems to be doing things, and it's in this very DIY kind of almost like a punk rock sensibility, where it's like nobody is worried about getting government financing or waiting for somebody to give them permission. They're just doing things that they think are exciting and that they feel are important, and that's great to be around a community like that. It actually reminds me a lot of all of my favorite cities anywhere in the world. I think Montreal is probably the most inspiring city in Canada because it has that culture, and you can't mistake it. The moment you walk around in the streets, you get a feel for that.